Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our conversation. I'm Colm. I'm the youth ministry coordinator here at St. Anne's. And as usual, Ryan is shotgun with me.
I'm Father Matthew. I'm the pastor here at St. Anne's.
And in our beloved hot seat, that we like to call it, is our new shiny employee. Wonderful to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourselves to the fans?
Well, I'm Erin Hickey. I'm the new office coordinator here at St. Anne's. And yeah, it's my third week only in here.
How's it going? How's your 3 weeks?
It's good. Yeah. Darlene is gone, so now I'm on my own and got big shoes to fill. But she did a good job in training me, and I'm excited to work here. So, yeah.
So you're basically a veteran. You know everything.
I am. 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. And can you tell us a bit about yourself? Where did you come from, or what made you want to work in the church?
Sure. Well, I heard your pitch at Mass saying, you were hiring. And so I went online and read, what you were looking for in a new office coordinator. And I felt like the write-up was pretty much, it described me. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I applied. But I don't know. I'm married to Tom Hickey, and we have 4 children. We met in university. We were both involved in CCO, Catholic Christian Outreach. So, a little bit about myself. Let's see. I love spending time with family and friends, and I recently learned to knit.
Wow.
Oh.
Yes, so I'm preparing.
Was that a quarantine hobby you took on? Or?
No, it was before. It was more of a winter, hibernating hobby.
Yeah.
So, I love music. We love to travel.
There you go. What's the furthest you've traveled, the most exotic place you've been?
Oh, the most exotic. Well, we went to Europe.
Okay.
So, my favorite was Cinque Terre. So,
I've heard that's
That's
Italian
the
river.
coast, right? Yeah.
So nice. Yeah.
I think my parents went there years ago.
Yeah.
They sent me pictures and made me jealous.
It's beautiful. I mean, if you're going to show pictures of someplace, you're going to show pictures of that. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see the Pope when you were there? Did you get to Rome and papal stuff?
Yeah, at a different time than when we traveled as a couple. But I went to World Youth Day and.
Okay.
World Youth Day in Rome?
Yep.
Oh, I was there too.
Oh,
we did not plan this. We didn't know that.
There you go.
Yes, I was there.
I went with the Archdiocese of Regina. They had a group that I joined onto.
Traitor! No. Well,
That's you didn't have a group at that time. I don't know why. So I jumped on with Regina.
I did 5 World Youth Days, but starting in Toronto. So I was too
Denver
young. I missed
was
Toronto.
my first.
Oh,
I was
Way
at Denver
back in
too.
the-
That's
Really?
right.
Yeah.
I heard that. Is it truth or fiction that the food was like sponsored by McDonald's in Denver?
Oh, that rings a bell. It was.
I think so.
Yes.
I was 13 at the time, so I just was there for the final mass. My family did this American road trip, and we went down to the Grand Canyon, and then came up and made sure we stopped in Denver for the mass and kind of.
Okay.
Such a
Snuck
Catholic road trip. Let's go on a
Absolutely.
road trip and go see the Pope. Not often you can do it
I
in
spent a
North
little
America.
time in the hospital in Denver for World Youth Day,
Oh,
so
all right.
just dehydrated. One of those.
Oh, I've heard stories about those as well.
Not a World Youth Day story without somebody passing out of heat or
that's
exhaustion.
right.
Great. Well, thanks, Aaron. We're really glad to have you on staff, and we're excited to
Yeah,
get to
me
know
too.
you more and work with you through the years.
Yeah.
And Colm, you had some difficult news actually this weekend. You said you wanted to.
Yeah. I
Update
mean,
people.
if we're checking in, it's highs and lows. Well, it was a bit of a low, bit of a clunker for us was, I guess, it was about 10 minutes before I had to take off to come in for Mass that I realized that we got robbed. Our garage was broken into. We're not in little old tiny Warman where everybody knows each other. And there's been lots of little things and, people's bikes being lifted and, standard stuff that happens in suburbia, but hasn't been in our backyard, right? And so it's a little bit different. And I was telling, I think, Father Matt, some of the staff that just had a bit of an encounter of noticing my son who's 6, like really understanding that it means that maybe I'm not safe, where he intentionally went to lock a door. And I kind of stopped and I was like, is he like, why are you doing that? But I said, is it because of the robbers? And he's like, yeah, and he also wants to punch him in the face if he sees him. So we had to process that emotion and dealing with forgiveness. But I know even Father Matt, we were talking right before of like, it kind of breaks your heart a little bit for this kid, a little bit of a loss of innocence. And not that we try to like, we want them to feel safe and secure, but it was also, you brought up a good point of like, it is also a good opportunity to kind of like show our power, right? And what we can do and the steps that we can take. And
Yeah, and I thought especially that I guess the idea that Ezra knew I can lock the door and that's a step I can take to keep me safe. Like, so sad that he felt the need to take that, but also that he knew like there are things that I can do.
Yeah.
So he had a sense of some agency too in that, which is
because I mean that's a big thing, right? And I mean, there's family friends who've dealt with much more worse things and the experience of victimhood, and but it's I guess for our kids it was their first real kind of encounter with that, and kind of a process of that, and still understanding empowerment and boundaries, but also of forgiveness. And so I've been praying for the robbers, we don't know. And I think it was Dan, just us coffee. He's like, man, you're a better man than me in this. I said, no, I'm like, this is me trying to like process. I know it's the right thing to do, even though I don't feel it. But I'm still going to show up. And I don't know, it kind of, in some ways, kind of connected a little bit to your homily on the weekend as prayer is hygiene or whatever.
So let's move into that then, I guess. So
That's a good segue.
There you go. Once in a while, we do the segues. Thanks, Erin.
Sometimes it works.
And I know you mentioned, maybe we'll get back to this, that you came to Mass, 10 minutes after discovering this?
Yeah, so I re-listened to the homily like 15 minutes ago because I told Father on Sunday, I was like, I didn't retain most of this today.
And there's something to that, too, of going to Mass when, like, in a way you're not maybe in, like, the best place to enter in, but still to make the decision to come and to give what you have to give to God in that moment. Right?
Yeah.
Is important.
True enough.
Yeah. So then for the homily, I really focused on the first reading and the gospel because they had really similar images there about the God setting up the vineyard, and he plants it and cares for it and puts up the walls and the watchtower. And then in the first reading, the issue is that it doesn't bear good fruit. And in the gospel, the issue is that it bears good fruit, but then those that are tending it refuse to give the fruit to the landowner. But the way that I thought we would take that for the homily is to say, well, what if you read it from the idea that I am the vineyard, that we are the vineyard, and God has given us so much, and then we have that call to bear fruit. And then the next step to say, well, what is it that stops us from bearing fruit? Either to bear the bad fruit or to not give the fruit to God. What holds us back? And that brought me to this idea of practicing the faith in a selfish way, to practicing our Christian faith selfishly. And I had some concrete points about that we'll talk about, but just kind of in general, do you guys have feedback on that? Like, do you think is that a risk we have? I want to share how that might happen sometimes to live our faith in a selfish way.
I think it was maybe one of your least popular homilies because people don't want to hear that. Like,
I kind of got that sense, actually.
It's kind of like, we don't want to hear that. Tell me that God loves me. Like,
I don't write the Gospels.
Don't tell me I'm in it for me. I say that jokingly, but I think it is a vulnerability, right? Is that we can twist things for our own good, and how much tricky and dangerous is it when we use it for our own faith, right? Or use our faith for that purpose. But yeah,
or even just bearing only the fruit we want, like only doing the work on the things that we want. Picking and choosing like the easy.
I'll bear this fruit, bear fruit here, but not so much over here. That's an interesting way to take it too.
Or I could think of it in that sense. I like the whole analogy of us being the whole vineyard. I wouldn't have been my natural way to place myself into that story. Is that Ignatian spirituality? You try to like place yourself in there, and you're like, take the whole thing. Usually I'd be a character going in there. I think sometimes it was like, I'll keep this berry for me, and I'll give you that fruit because I don't like that fruit. And maybe in some ways, do I feel that sometimes the Lord's calling me to like bear fruit or serve in ministry, in this part, be this patch of the vineyard, and I was like, no, I want my vineyard to be, all grapes. I want my vineyard to be, all experiences of consolation. I'm going to give up the desolation experience. I'm going to ignore that many of the saints went through that, and just, convince myself that, I can just live in this, patch type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely risks for that. And I know as a priest too, like I can do the same thing. I can easily make the Mass all about me in my heart, and that's not clearly what it's meant for. And then I had the 3 points that I brought in. I thought these we had talked about a bit more. And they came again from von Balthasar, the same guy I quoted last week. and maybe the reason I'm on this Balthazar kick, I guess I could say, is
Because you like to say his name.
it's a
Hans von
tough name to
Balthazar.
say. I always practice before I announce it. Hans Urs von Balthazar. But the reason for that is I have a series of books I use when I'm preparing my homily, different commentaries and meditation books and things. And one of them is this book by von Balthazar, and he was a Catholic priest. And it's a series of just meditations he has on for every Sunday of the year. And I feel like he's been on a roll lately. When I read his stuff, I just feel like I get good ideas from him. And he is very wordy. And I find in some ways, like, I don't like it, the way he uses this really strange language. But in some ways, too, it does make me stop and think more deeply about what he's saying, which gets me more deeper into it. So the first point, then, that he presented, and these are ways he said that we can, he actually calls them false gods, but it's the same idea of living our faith, making it about ourselves, living it selfishly. And the first one he says is the Mass as the congregation's self-fulfillment. So making the celebration of the Mass about ourselves. So any feedback on that one?
Yeah, I was telling you, pre-recording here that if my wife was here, she would rant and rave on this one too. We've encountered that a lot and sometimes it comes from it's like a fine line. It's like we're there, we're worshiping, and then suddenly we tip over and it's all about us, And it's not. I don't think it's often we show up saying like I'm here for me, like we don't carry that sign but we can fall into that. And the tricky thing is sometimes like even the ministries like. Or I'll even serve like a youth ministry event and I'll be caught up about like, wow, that was so slick. That was so great. And I got that parent feedback. Like
I felt so good about that.
That's so great. I'll keep doing this because of that feedback. And it's like, like that's not the reason I signed up, but I can use that as the reason I stick around. Or, I'm going to choose to go to this parish or that parish because like, man, music ministry was just crazy on point, or that homily just really, touched me or moved me. And it's like, wait, are we doing that to like applaud ourselves about how great we're doing, or we're selling out, or am I here because that's the one true God and he's worthy of worship, So I think that's the most one practically that's kind of like my red flag one that I'm more attuned to.
Oh yeah.
But which I mean, so that's just natural, but I think that could be dangerous for me is more probably because the other two are probably my personal concern.
Oh yeah.
And usually I get caught up with maybe the concern of others. I'm going to judge to say you are here for, your self-fulfillment, where I'm ignoring that I'm here to feel good about myself,
There's yet another way that we could sort of get twisted off here.
Yeah.
And Erin, on this point, I don't know if you had any thoughts on the making Mass about ourselves?
I think that it's common, you hear people say, oh, I don't really get anything out of Mass, or like, I don't. So people might fall away from the church that way. Like I know in my experience in ministry, I would run into that with people, but sometimes it was just a matter of them not actually understand what was actually going on at the Mass, like that it's the source and summit of our, that's happening right in front of us. And so maybe we get confused about why we're there, I think sometimes for people.
And I feel a real tension about that as one who, leads a parish, because I do want the Mass to be beautiful. Yeah. Right. I want moving music and homilies that touch people's hearts and things like that. Like I want that to be the case. But that's why I tried to use over and over again this language of what's primary. Yeah. And the main reason that we come to Mass is the worship of God. And if we do that well and put that in its place, then often the rest of it does follow along, ideally.
Yeah. I was not that I'm a great music minister by any stretch of the means, but back in the day, I was part of a choir because I play instrument that I try to keep on the down low because I'm rusty and not great anymore. But and someone was leading some kind of a workshop, and he said we were singing or cantering something, and he's like, "Okay, that was beautiful." He's like, "Now sing it prayerfully." And not to say that they weren't trying to do that, but he said, "Make your focus about it being prayerful." And we sang it again, and everyone noticed, like in this moment, they were like, "Wow, now that was beyond beautiful. It was beautiful and prayerful." Like literally in the same sense of just an experience of kind of spirit of like, you could tell it had been transformed.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Which was
that's
only like the orientation of how we did it. And like you said, it's such a tricky line. because when you want to pray well, you want to do things well. Like there is practical like execution and preparation and putting your best foot forward. But so it's, checking in with intent, but it's a very tricky thing. I guess my sense has sometimes been like, we love St. Anne's. We love the community has been so essential for us. But like, I think it's like the danger of like, as long as the community remembers why we're community, right? Yeah. It's community centered around Christ, not for the sake. We're not centered around each other.
Yeah. And that's a great point as well that I didn't get to the homily was kind of on my mind is because I know even when I was growing up in the church, there's a lot of talk of like the importance of the community. But I often felt as a kid growing up even that like if it's the community for what? And you're right, it's community centered on Christ. But if we lose sight of that centering, and it's just as the community turned in on itself, then that's not what we're for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then we had step number 2. So that was challenge number 1 is Mass's self-fulfillment rather than primarily worship of God. And then the second challenge Balthazar gives is prayer as psychic hygiene. And that's, again, very weird wording. But there's something to that, right? That if I go to prayer with the concern of what's this going to do for me?
Yeah.
And Erin, I think you had said you wanted to... This one sort of resonated with you, I guess?
Yeah, it did. More on a more of a personal level, I think, like of my own personal prayer at home, less than at Mass. Okay. I don't know, but just, wanting to experience God in my personal prayer time, wanting to experience intimacy and like to go deeper in my faith in those, but sometimes that being, I could, when you shared that in your homily, I could feel that, maybe sometimes it's too much of a selfish sort of motive, even though I know God wants me to experience him intimately. But that if I'm going to prayer, I need to put the first thing first, and that the point is to worship him. So I go to my prayer because he deserves my praise and my thanksgiving and my worship, and not just to, feel warm and fuzzy and to have consolation, like you said, and all these types of things. But it was a good reminder for me, I guess, to that the point of me spending time with God is first thing is to worship him. And so,
And that makes me think of too, like a lot of our saints who've written about prayer talk about things like the desert or the dark night of the soul, these times when you go to prayer and it is just not fun and the emotions are just not there. And it's something that a lot of people experience, at least on a small level. And I know often it comes in confession, or people come to talk to me saying like, they feel like they don't know how to pray anymore is often how it's worded, because they used to feel a lot of consolation and intimacy and now they're not. And I think the danger with that is too, we can start to judge the quality of our prayer based on our emotions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And emotions are not good judges of that. Like you were saying, and if we keep that, what first things first, and like, I'm here faithfully to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm coming faithfully doing that, then that's what God calls me to.
Yeah.
And let the emotions be what they are.
Yeah. We live in like a society that is just, in some ways to me, like just run rampant that it's emotion driven and emotion seeking. We live in a need of like, just subdue the pain, subdue this, or, self-help, regulate emotion. And emotions are real. We tell our kids like, you are angry, you got hurt. Like that's a real thing. But then, processing through that. And it's hard sometimes to struggle. I find my own life, but also teaching my kids, but also in youth ministry of like, here, practice this daily prayer. And they're like, this is boring. What do I get out of it? Like, and it's just like, it's such a hard thing to push through, right? Because it's like, I don't get fulfillment. It doesn't numb the pain. It doesn't fix my broken family. It doesn't, like there's not, they can't see the results of it. And I do this, and this is the input to output in that direct kind of way.
And it's not a quick fix.
And it's just, I'm like, how do you crack this? Right. And I know what we teach about it and whatever, but it's like, and I've kind of gone back to, it's just modeling, I think is the most effective way. And that's where, we're trying small group stuff, or just to put leaders in kids' lives to say like, well, they seem to not be a total train wreck of life. But even then it's like, well, no, there's a lot of pain in there. But to say, well, maybe it is worth it, or maybe it's worth asking the question. And I guess the example that I thought was, these men's groups that we're part of, and we were doing that at the parish here, and we'll see if it starts up again. This That Man Is You, and so usually we meet at 6 a.m. Which is atrocious, but yet we averaged like a bad week was like 15 guys, or it was 25, 30 guys, and they're like what in God's earth, like why it inspires you to like show up. And like, I'll be honest, I've enjoyed it. The content is like solid, but it's like not very consoling. It's not like the most glorious idea. It's not like we're worshiping the heavens at like 6 a.m. But the consistency of what I saw over the year, the fraternity that developed, the kind of routine of it, right?
And God worked in that. He worked in that
for
regular
sure.
consistency.
And we've known, and we could share a couple stories of guys' hearts who really were transformed, or ways that some stuff changed in their families, and all it was from showing up, in that sense. And that's part of the reason I'm not a routine dude, but that's what routines like are really great for me, because I'm not. It's like the prayer of the church. So like the liturgy of the hours, I really come to love is that it gives me a framework to show up when I have no desire to show up. Yeah. And I'm not waiting for the emotion to lead the prayer or this. And it's like, okay, I can just open the book, or I can open the app, and just pray through it. Because I think if I was waiting to say this is going to be a great experience, I'm never going to actually carve out the time for it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then the third point, and this is maybe one you don't need to spend as much time on. It's a bit of a more obscure one, maybe. And maybe one I could have skipped, but it was there, so we'll bring it here. But it was Balthazar's third point is dogma as psychological archetype. And the best I could do, like, what is he saying with this? What does this mean? But dogma, of course, is the teachings of the church. And it was Cardinal Ratzinger, actually. It's before he was Pope Benedict, writing as Cardinal Ratzinger. He used the image of dogmas are windows looking on eternity.
I like that.
And he actually says that they're not walls to block our vision, but they're windows looking on eternity. And so we do have these dogmas, this church teaching telling us these glorious truths about God. So we can see the beauty of God, and so that we can worship God. And it is true that knowing about God also tells us truths about ourselves. That is absolutely true. But is there a danger as well as taking what should be a window to eternity and just using it as a mirror? Well, what does this just say about me? And another point in that too, it's another Balthazar point, is that he wrote an essay called Theology and Sanctity, all about how studying theology should bring us to holiness. But he starts it with the point that since the Middle Ages, very few theologians have been saints.
Ouch.
I know. And he's a theologian writing it.
That's dangerous.
But it's interesting to think of like St. Augustine, St. Bonaventure, St. Thomas Aquinas. Like these were both saints and theologians. The theologians being people who've really investigated the teachings of the church, the dogmas God has given us, understand them more deeply. But after St. Thomas, like there's a shift actually in that. And we don't until like maybe like St. Cardinal Newman now is another saint theologian, but it's been a while. And so maybe part of that worry is if we don't, is instead of taking dogma as a way of entering into the glory of God, but of making it self-referential. What does it say about me?
Man, if it's happening to theologians, then I'm really screwed. But that's a super interesting insight. But like, it was fancy words. So on Sunday with everything going on, I was like, okay, I'll loop back to that one.
Thanks.
But I like that line though. I think from Pope Benedict about it of the windows. Yeah, and I guess that first trigger to me is often people have expressed the idea of icons from our Eastern tradition, right? That they're windows to the soul. And so much of one of my friends who's Ukrainian Catholic who's taught me so much was how much teaching and catechesis is in an icon, and that it proclaims and it teaches about the dogmas of the faith, that it actually reveals and shares so much about who God is. Even often we see like the images of Mary even, right? And the colors of the blue and the red. And I'm going to screw it up with one showing the divinity, one showing the humanity, and how Mary and Jesus, it's always reversed, right? Because it's the there's the two natures, right? But it's like he put on his humanity onto his divinity. And anyway, it's just I always found that so interesting. I was like, I just thought it was beautiful before, but yet it has so much to show and to teach me. And I guess so that's kind of why I went with that. Is like, do I take all these lessons or teachings of the faith to help me get to know God better, not just to know the right answer? And I can be guilty of that even sometimes as a minister of like, I just want you to know the right answer. And I was like, well, yes, I want these, our young people to be catechized and be formed, but so that they have a way and about of encountering God. But sometimes we can screw that up. But yeah, I don't know.
I like your right answer point as well. It's another way of taking it. I think that makes sense, that if we are learning these truths about God, are we learning them just kind of as like facts to know, like to pass the test or to have this information, or to draw us into relationship with God? And what about Erin? I'd say, like, as a mom raising kids in the faith, like, is this a thing to keep in mind, I guess, to not just have them learn facts about God, but to help to instill this relationship in God in your kids?
Yeah, for sure. And actually where my brain kind of went with that was like, even with my spouse or someone you love, the more you learn about them, like the more you get to know over the years, it's not just like, oh, well, it's not just facts that you know about that person, but the more you know, the more you love of that person. Mm-hmm. So it should be probably, with theology, like it's the more we know. It's a very basic sort of.
But it's true. So it should deepen the relationship.
Yeah, the more I know about Tom, and the more I, all of a sudden, you think you know everything about that person, and then there's like this little mystery that's solved about them, and you're like, wow, and you just love them more. And anyway, so yeah,
it's interesting. Someone came to me years ago and brought up the idea of, I'm Catholic, but the idea, I think he was from a different faith. And so he thinks of me kind of like a youth pastor in some of our other traditions, right? And I was like, well, it's not quite the same here. But but the sense of like, sometimes you hear the expression of like pastor's kid, or this idea, that they're concerned that sometimes, the rebellious nature of the children of the leader of faith or whatever. And that's out there a little bit if we think it's valid or not. And so this person brought up that concern. They're like, as someone who cares about all these young people, are you concerned that, your kids are going to kind of, go off base and reject it? And, which terrified me. And then I sat there and I was like, well, like, maybe, I don't know. Like they have to make their own decisions, and I often can catch myself of like, okay, I'm going to lead this youth group or do this different stuff. I was like, but does like my daughter know the 10 Commandments? Does she know this story? Or like, there's sometimes a pressure of like, oh, Jacinta can come to, junior youth next year. Like, she better know the answers. Otherwise, like,
she better behave.
Like there is that part that's there. And we were thinking, and I find it's Ezra sometimes who catches me off guard the most, my 6-year-old, that, I think he doesn't know a lot of the stuff. And then there was some expression about God or whatever. And he's like, yeah, how Jesus, he died for our sins so we can be in heaven. And I was like, oh,
well, good.
But like, not that he knows the answer, but I was like, he gets the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And even going back to the robbing stuff, my wife and I, we're angry and we're choked and venting and, we're blowing off some steam. And I said, like, it's easy to just like not trust the world and get angry. And, I might put up a security camera or whatever, right? This fool me once type of thing. But I said, but at the same point, like I said, we're going to feel this emotion and go in there, but we're also going to still care about our neighbors because that's who we are. Like that's what we're called to, and not like get stuck into that rhythm of that emotion or what we're about. And I think that's maybe where I try to get into the big context of all this windows of eternity is like, am I providing an opportunity for my kids to just to understand who God is and where God is in whatever situation of life, and we've done a lot of that. COVID's given us a lot of opportunity to have conversations, but maybe that's kind of where I landed this weekend, was just to say, okay, like forget all this stuff, forget every the madness going on. Like I'm showing up here for God, and God's going to reveal himself in his time and his ways. And can I be humble enough to just let him do it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And how through that, like that does give God a chance to work in us. And I was worried about in the homilies, I don't want to downplay the fact of that Mass is fulfilling and prayer is good for us and dogma tells us true things about ourselves. But really a matter of just recentering, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even that line, I think you had said it, and you hear it so many other times, and just priorities of life, like first things first, right? And we do the classic teacher example of the jar with the chocolate bars or whatever and filling it up, and or the big rocks, and they put the big rocks first and then the little pebbles
Right.
and then you put the sand, and you see how much can still get in there. And as much as it's kind of a classic visual example, it kind of goes back to that. Like when Sharon and I have talked sometimes of like when life is kind of crazy and we just kind of like reset, put first things first, and then get the train back on the tracks as it were.
Yeah. So, Erin, I'm curious now that Colm talked about his kids at youth ministry. Do you worry about how your kids behave at his youth ministry?
Oh, no.
Is that a stress?
Well,
Confessional
You don't
from
need
a
to
parent
answer
to the youth pastor.
So, Erin's kids go to Colm's youth ministry.
yeah. No, he's got I like his take on, we've talked about it before.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And he's got like a super solid take on kids and bad behavior. And anyway, that's part of why I love them being actually in his youth ministry. Yeah.
Very nice.
And I mean, I think it's part of the space. I mean, and it's the work of the team and the volunteers too, of like, it's a space of formation, and was it last week or the week before we were talking about like, if we were waiting to be perfect, like we'd never show up, and like, are we willing to kind of journey alongside? And because God knows God has to be extra patient with me, so it's only fair that we try to extend it. Yeah, for sure.
But your reminders in your homily, that's important. Like we need to be put in our place too a little bit, just like that. I just mean that we are not God. God deserves like what he deserves. He deserves what he is owed, and that's our worship.
Yeah. I think you're right.
So,
and whenever I preach these homilies, I preach it to myself, kind of in the first place, I think. And it was a good reminder to me, and especially I find like when I celebrate Mass, I can spend a lot of time worrying about like, what is this like for the people in the pews? And I realized actually how like destructive that was for my worship of God and my prayer at Mass, because I can't control how people feel for one thing, and I don't even know how people feel. But as I've been working to put that aside more and more, and just like my call at this moment is to worship God well, and just put that first.
And you're leading us in that, right? So I don't know. I'll put it out there. I think I can. I think you can notice to some degree, right? When in any form, especially Mass, but in any prayer, when the person's primary intention is to worship God well, and they just happen to be in a position of leadership, I think it draws people in. I think of some of my favorite friends who are great leaders of like praise and worship, and it was just on an online retreat like a week or two ago, and I messaged my buddy afterwards who was leading praise and worship via like a Zoom call, and I just texted him and I said I was like, thank you for letting me like worship well. And you could tell in the sense of like, he was just lost in the prayer, and by like an accident of that, he helped us, and that he seemed kind of oblivious in some sense to like everybody else, which I thought was kind of interesting.
That's a great image of, what I think this call is that seek first the kingdom of God and all things will be added. Then make what we do center on love of God, love of neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The practical, I'll shout him out. It was Ryan Mitchell. Hey, Ryan, you did a great job.
That's a good job.
But he did a super functional thing, which was odd, but it caught me off. It was like the crew, the music ministry, kind of in like basement of a house or something like that. I don't know where they were coming from. Their little studio, but they had a cross. He had like a crucifix, and they turned when it was time to pray. Like they turned the lights off in the room, so like you couldn't see the musicians at all, and all you saw was the cross. As a visible sign of like this is what it's about. It's not about us doing this thing, and like a very practical, simple thing. And I was like, holy heck, like that helps a lot. A practical thing for me when I find I'm super caught up, especially on Mass, is not that I think I'm any holy, is I close my eyes a lot. And I think some people are like, oh, they're lost in prayer. But for me, it's like I'm a super distracted person. It's like I just need to stop looking at people.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do that too, but
any tricks for?
It's an indication to my children. Like I close my eyes during Mass so that they know that, okay, they look at me to say something and then they see my eyes closed. Okay. I mean, it doesn't always work. Sometimes they still talk to me and tattletale in there, but they see that I'm actually praying, and it's a reminder for them. I should be praying too, probably.
Yeah.
So
there you go. I know some people that bring like a notebook or a journal, to Mass. I don't know if you see
I've seen that
a few
before
people
too.
do
Yeah.
it too. Is
If you want to make your priest day, take notes while he gives a homily.
Yeah, there you
There's
go.
no ego boost more than someone taking notes. Not that that's
Yeah.
why we should do it.
you can still doodle, but it'll just make them feel good. Prayer is hygiene. The experience.
There you
No,
go.
but in some ways, sometimes I'll bring like prayer books and stuff, and I won't even use them. But it's almost like an orientation of like I'm going to take this seriously. Not that. Well, sometimes maybe I do show up not taking it so seriously. It's like I'm gonna be ready for this, you know. And, I don't know. So if you have any
Expectant.
tips or tricks of what orientates you well, I'd love to know. We're always looking for hacks for our kids and young people, and well, even grumpy old guys like me. So yeah, anything for you, Father? I'd be interested of what you find helps orientate yourself. Maybe not even just on Sunday. You said some stuff, but
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah, on Sunday, I've just had to kind of like retrain myself actually when it comes to celebrating Mass to like worry less about everybody else and just focus on worship. Like, that's the thing a habit I've had to build in myself as I celebrate Mass. And for my own prayer, well, one image I found, I shared it a while ago too in a homily, is from Ron Rolheiser, but he talks about imagine that you're visiting an elderly, maybe a parent or grandparent in a home, and you go there for an hour every day after work to spend time with that person. And often as you do that, it's not a really like emotionally charged time. Like you're there talking about pills and weather and things, but you're there with them consistently. And then you have a sibling who lives across the country. So no fault of their own, they can't get there that often, but they come once or twice a year. And then when they come to see the person, it's much more emotionally charged and they're crying and hugging and everything. But Rolheiser's point, which I really appreciated, is like over the course of like 3-4 years, who's going to have the stronger relationship with the person? And it's going to be the one who is consistently there, even if it's not as emotionally charged all the time. Like that's where relationships grow, is in that consistency. And so I found approaching prayer with that in mind has really made a difference for me.
Yeah, I love, and in the last couple of years, consistency has been like a big word in my life, and some of the work we do and the way we approach. But in my own, like that men's group example was like, as Sharon could tell you, she's like, on the days when he gets up at 5:30 and shows up, like he's a little bit better of a husband. Like there's some sense of like the consistency, raises that base level of relationship and orientation, and it's like maybe it's consistent if it's 5 minutes or if it's a rosary or if it's we try to do like a sleep for one or pray with the kids. Like when we're consistent with that, like I find the relationship with the kids is much better, and when we're off of it, that's when usually they're,
Yeah, so
saints
that's
in the
my
making.
thing anyway, is that consistency I found has really helped too.
That's great.
Remember, it's about growing in that relationship with God. But thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I think that's it for now. Erin, welcome to the
Thank
team.
you.
Yes.
Welcome
Yeah.
to the conversation,
Thanks.
jumping into the hot seat. We appreciate that.
Yep. It's
And feel free if you have little tips or tricks to how you orientate yourself and keep first things first in your experience of practicing your faith. Comment, let us know. It can be a gift to all of us. And stay well, and we'll see you next week. I guess happy Thanksgiving. I guess it'll be Thanksgiving will happen in between these two episodes. So I know it's been 2020, but also maybe comment, share. What are you thankful for in this year? Let's bring some joy to the world, and we'll see you soon.